In this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at subtracting integers. We just learned how to add integers. So what we want to accomplish in this video are three things. How do you subtract integers? What does subtracting integers look like modeled on a number line? And how are addition and subtraction related? Now that third point is going to be probably the most important point, is understanding how addition and subtraction are related so that we can make subtraction a little bit easier, because typically for middle schoolers, subtraction is probably one of the more difficult operations because it's hard to conceptualize with negative numbers. So if we can connect it to addition, which is a little bit easier operation, we'll be much better off. So first, what does subtraction look like on the number line? So if we can kind of visualize what's happening when we subtract numbers, it's easier to tell what's happening when we're subtracting a negative number. So I've got some basic subtraction problems here, and I'm going to model these on the number line, and hopefully we can kind of see a pattern here and predict what happens when we start subtracting negative numbers. So I'm going to start with this one right here, 5 minus 3. Very basic problem, but I just want to show you what that looks like on the number line so we can start to see a pattern here. So I'm going to start with 5, so I'm going to get my number line over here to 5, and then I'm going to subtract 3. Now when I'm subtracting, I'm decreasing the value, right? We're taking away. So minus 3 is actually going to move us in this direction to the left. It's not going to increase in value, it's going to decrease in value. So this is what minus 3 looks like. So we have 5 minus 3, and that puts us right here at 2. So obviously 5 minus 3 is 2. So now I want to look at 5 minus 2. What's going to happen when we subtract 2? Let me erase that there. And we're going to start over with 5 again. And now we're going to subtract 2. Again, that's going to decrease the value, but we're only going to decrease it 2. So 5 minus 2 puts us at 3 on the number line. So 5 minus 2 is 3. Okay, pretty straightforward. Let's continue this pattern now. I'm going to subtract 1. So 5 minus 1, again, is still going to decrease the value, but I'm only going to decrease it 1. So 5 minus 1 puts us here at 4. And then the next one I'm going to do is 5 minus 0. Well, that one's pretty easy because that's not going to decrease it at all. We're actually just going to stay the same. So 5 minus 0 puts me at 5. So what do you notice is happening here with these differences? So we had 2, 3, 4, 5. The values are actually getting bigger, aren't they? So the less we take away from 5, the bigger our difference is, or the bigger the answer is. So let's make a prediction. What should 5 minus negative 1 be? If this pattern holds true, 5 minus negative 1 is actually going to increase the value. Now we're going to start going to the right of 5 on the number line because we've reached 5, and now when we take away a negative, it's actually going to increase the value of the number. So now 5 minus negative 1 looks like this on the number line actually. I'm actually taking away a negative. So when you take something negative away, you are actually increasing the value, and that's going to be 6. Now that seems kind of weird and it's hard for us to wrap our minds around, but taking something negative away actually increases the value. So I like to make the analogy of think about something negative happening to something you own. Like let's say you own a car and something negative happens to it, like you get into an accident and then there's a dent in it. So that's something negative about the car. Well, what would happen to the value of the car if you took something negative away? What would happen to the value of the car if we took the negative dent away, or we fixed it? The value would go up, wouldn't it? Well, the same thing happens here with our integers. If you take a negative away, you are actually increasing the value. Taking negatives away increases value. Now that's a very important point to take away from this lesson. Let's continue on here. What would 5 minus negative 2 then have to be? So 5, well, we were at 6 there. So if we take negative 2 away, we're actually going to increase the value by 2. Taking away 2 negatives is actually like increasing the value by 2. So 5 minus negative 2 is actually 7. And then lastly, 5 minus negative 3, we're going to increase the value by 3. And that's going to give us 8. 5 minus negative 3 is 8. Now you might be thinking already, well, that's just kind of like now you're adding. Now you're adding on instead of subtracting when you take away a negative. And that's exactly the point we want you to get to, because then we're connecting subtraction and addition together, because subtracting negatives is exactly like adding positives, which is much easier to do. So that's the point we want to make in this video, is making that connection between subtraction and addition. So here are the questions. What does subtracting a positive from a number do? So that was all the first ones here in blue. Subtracting a positive from a number decreases the value. When we take something positive away, the value is decreased. So it decreases the value. And then what does subtracting a negative number do? We saw that in red. When you take a negative away, you're actually increasing the value. So that increases the value. These would be fantastic things to put in your notes. Okay, subtracting a negative increases the value. So let's model this on the number line and start to see if we can handle this, these subtraction problems. So negative 3 minus 6. So I'm going to start at 0 here and go to negative 3 on my number line. And then I'm going to subtract 6 from it. Now I'm taking a positive away because 6 is a positive number. So I'm going to actually be decreasing the value even more. And I'm going to decrease it by 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's taking 6 more away, decreasing the value more by 6. And that puts us at negative 9. So negative 3 minus 6 is negative 9. Next one, 9 minus 12. I'm going to start here at 0 and go to 9. And I'm decreasing it by 12, which is a positive number. So this is going to decrease the value. Whoops. I'm going to decrease the value here by 12. So getting back to 0, that'd be 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's decreasing the value by 12, and that puts me at negative 3 on the number line. Next one, 7 minus negative 2. So I'm going to, again, start at 7. Go to 7 on my number line, and now I'm decreasing it by negative 2. So I'm taking a negative away, so that's actually going to increase the value by 2. Take negative 2 away. So 7 minus negative 2 actually puts me at a positive 9. That's going to increase the value. That's like 7 plus 2. Next one, negative 4 minus negative 6. So I'm going to start at negative 4 on the number line. And I'm taking a negative 6 away. So I'm taking a negative away. That's going to increase the value by 6. So I'm going to increase the value by 6. That would be 4, 5, 6. Taking a negative 6 away is like increasing it by 6, and that's going to put me at positive 2. So negative 4 minus negative 6 is actually positive 2. So we can start to see what's happening here on the number line. It's really broken down to whether it's one of two things. You're either decreasing in value or you're increasing in value. Now, which one is going to do which? And we just talked about that. So here we're going to make that connection between increasing in value and decreasing value. There's two ways you can increase the value of a number, and that's to add a positive to it or subtract a negative. You can add something positive or take away something negative. Again, go back to that car analogy. What if I wanted to increase the value of my car? Well, I can add something positive to it, like new wheels or a new stereo or something awesome to it, or I can take something negative about it away. I can fix the dents, or I can remove some rust, or I can take something negative away from the car. That will increase the value as well. So two different ways to increase in value: adding a positive or taking away or subtracting a negative. So if we look at both of these examples here, 5 plus 3 and 5 minus negative 3 on the number line, we're going to notice that they're identical. When you model these on the number line, they look exactly the same. So if I go 5 plus 3, here's 5, and then plus 3, that's going to give me 8. And then 5 minus a negative 3, well, I'm going to start at 5 again, and then if I take a negative 3 away, that's going to increase the value by 3, and again, that's going to put me at 8. So these two are identical. These are equivalent. 5 plus 3 and 5 minus negative 3 do the same thing. You end up with 8 both times. And then now, likewise, how do I decrease the value of something? Well, I can add a negative to it. So again, if I go to my car and if I want to decrease the value of it, which I probably wouldn't want to do, but if I wanted to decrease the value, I could add something negative to it. I could take a sledgehammer to it and add some dents to it. That would be adding negative things to it. That would decrease the value. Or I could subtract something positive from it. I could remove that cool stereo that I added on there, or I could downgrade the wheels that I have or something like that. That would decrease the value. So adding something negative or subtracting something positive both have the same effect. They decrease the value. So again, I'll model that. 5 plus negative 3, if I start at 5, and if I add a negative 3, adding a negative will decrease the value, plus negative 3, that puts me at 2. And then 5 minus 3, if I go to 5 and then I just take 3 away, again, that puts me at 2. These are equivalent. These are identical things. So that is the major point that we want to make in this lesson is addition and subtraction are very much related. And how are they related? And if we understand that, we can kind of go back and forth here. So here I've got examples of pairs of number sentences that are identical. And we want to make that connection here. 7 plus 3 is 10. And 7 minus a negative 3, again, that's decreasing a negative actually increases the value. So this is also 10. And 12 plus negative 4 is 8. There's canceling going on there. And 12 minus 4 is 8. These are identical expressions. Negative 8 plus 5, there's some canceling going on there. That's negative 3. And then negative 8 minus a negative 5, you're taking away a negative. So that's going to increase the value by 5. And that's going to put me at negative 3 as well. And then the last one, negative 6 plus negative 3 is, these are combining, negative 9. And then negative 6 minus 3, I'm decreasing the value by 3, is also negative 9. So what's the connection here between these? How are addition and subtraction related? Subtraction is the same as adding the opposite. Okay, when we subtract something, adding its opposite would be the same thing. So if you look at these numbers right here, 3 and negative 3, 4 and negative 4, 5 and negative 5, 3 and negative 3. These are opposites, or what we call additive inverses. They are opposites. So when you add the opposite, that's the same as subtraction. And that is the connection we want to make. So subtraction is the same as adding the additive inverse or adding the opposite of the number. So we can create an equivalent addition expression from a subtraction expression and vice versa. It makes some of the problems a lot easier to compute if we write them in their addition form, because addition is a little bit easier operation to do. So we're going to practice that right here. What addition expression would be equivalent to each subtraction expression? So 15 minus 5, now that I could do, but what would that look like as addition? If we modeled that on the number line, what would that look like as addition? Well, that would be 15 plus negative 5. These would be equivalent. Now, which one of these is easier to do? I would say the subtraction one's easier to do, but we can write them both ways. Next one, 23 minus negative 8. I'm taking away a negative. So removing a negative increases in value. This is like 23 plus 8. Now, which one of these two is easier to do? I would say by far the addition version of this is easier to do. So you can start to see why it's important to be able to flip-flop back and forth between subtraction versions and addition versions of our expressions. Next one, negative 7 minus 12. Well, that's decreasing in value, so that would be like adding a negative 12. Now, which one of these two is easier to do? We might be split, but I think the addition one here is easier to do because that's combining, and that would be negative 19. And then the last one, negative 3 minus a negative 10. Now, this type of problem is really confusing for a lot of students, but if we write this in its addition form, taking away a negative is like adding or increasing in value negative 13 plus 10. Now, I think that version is much easier to do. So you can see out of these four, 3 out of the 4 were easier to do in their addition form. So it is critical that we're able to convert a subtraction problem to an addition problem. So let's try that with these 6 problems, and we'll determine which one we want to do. Now, 9 minus 12. 9 minus 12 you might be able to do without writing that as addition, but I'm going to write it as addition just so you can see it. taking away a positive, that's decreasing in value. That's the same as adding a negative. Now, it might be up to you. We might be split on this, but I think the subtraction one is actually easier to do here. So 9 minus 12 is -3, and 9 plus -12 is also -3. But you can see how we could write it in either form to help us compute this. Next one, 45 minus 15. Now, this one I can just do. 45 minus 15 is 30, but I could also write that as 45 plus -15, which is also 30. Here, I think the subtraction version is easier as well. Next one, -12 minus 9. This is decreasing in value. We're taking 9 away, so that's -21. We also could write this as an addition form plus a -9, which is also -21. Again, we might be split on which one we think is easier there. I think addition is usually easier in this case when the signs are the same. But here on the right column, this is where it's really going to pay off, because subtracting negative numbers is really confusing for middle schoolers. So I would definitely recommend that we go with the addition version when we're doing subtracting a negative. Taking away a negative is like adding. So it's really a lot easier to write these as addition problems. This would be an increase in value, so -29 plus 20. This one is definitely easier to do in its addition form, and that's going to be -9. So I know the answer to that is also -9. Addition, way easier in my opinion on that one. Here, 31 minus -19, that's increasing in value again, so that'd be 31 plus 19. And hands down, this one is way easier to do as addition. That's 50, so I know the answer to this is also 50. Addition was much easier there. And lastly, -14 minus -20. As addition, this is going to be increasing in value plus 20. And that's going to be a +6, so I know that one is also +6 as well. Again, the addition version was much easier there. So you can save yourself a lot of grief and stress by learning how to convert subtraction to addition, and vice versa, because some addition problems would be easier as subtraction. So just being able to go back and forth between these operations is going to be a critical skill. So remember, subtraction is the same as adding the opposite.